When you think the Madrid situation is reaching its peak, you are wrong. What happened last week was another chapter in a season full of drama. Unhappy players, unhappy fans, and doubly unhappy results. And at the centre of it all, more than 30 million petitions to get rid of Kylian Mbappe. Real Madrid is anything but professional at the moment, but one man was right about the whole squad's behaviour. Xabi Alonso said he was coaching a team of children. And yes, the man is right. Summer of 2025. Xabi Alonso walks back into the Bernabeu as head coach, and the building treats him like a returning son. And in some ways, he was. He had won everything as a player here. He had played alongside Casillas, Ramos and Ronaldo, watched Zinedine Zidane build a Champions League dynasty and absorbed every lesson that mattered. Then he had left, quietly, without drama, the way he did almost everything. Bayer Leverkusen had been the testing ground. He took a club that had not won a Bundesliga title in over 100 years and gave them an undefeated league season. He did not just win, he invented a way of winning. The football world watched him like a comet, knowing exactly where it was going to land. It was going to land in Madrid. Carlo Ancelotti's last season had been a slow goodbye. Real Madrid had finished the year trophy-less. The club needed a reset, and Xabi Alonso was the chosen man. There was just one detail nobody outside the building knew. According to sources close to the club, Florentino Perez did not actually want him. Alonso's man inside the club was the general director, Jose Angel Sanchez. He was the one who pushed for the hire. Perez accepted, but he was never convinced. He never really believed that Xabi Alonso, with all his ideas about pressing and tactical discipline and shared sacrifice, was the right manager for a dressing room full of Galacticos. He just did not have a better option. Alonso, of course, knew none of this. Or maybe he did and decided it didn't matter. Either way, at his first press conference he said something that should have set off every alarm in the building. When ego is tamed, it can serve as a motor. No one has any reason to take themselves so seriously outside of the team structure. The press wrote it down. The fans nodded. The players, somewhere in the building, were already twitching. Then came the first Clásico. October, Bernabeu. Barcelona is walking in with its swagger fully restored, expecting another emphatic win. Real Madrid beat them, convincingly. For a moment, everything looked like it was going to work. The pressing was sharp, the structure was visible, Bellingham looked alive again. Even Vinicius, in the rare moments he tracked back, looked like a player who remembered what defending was. The headlines were instant. Xabi was the answer. The Bernabeu was reborn. It was, of course, the high point. He just didn't know it yet, because under the surface the foundations were already cracking. The players had begun to talk, the complaints had begun to circulate, and the man Florentino Perez had quietly been keeping in his back pocket, a former player, a Castilla coach, with a face the dressing room already trusted, was beginning to show up at first team training a little more often. His name was Alvaro Arbeloa, and he was about to become the most useful piece of furniture at Real Madrid. To understand what went wrong at Valdebebas, you have to understand what Xabi Alonso was actually trying to do. He was not trying to entertain anyone. He was trying to install a system, a real one, the kind that demanded every single player on the pitch run, press, cover and think. And that is exactly the problem. Because at Real Madrid, certain players do not run. Didier Deschamps, the manager of France, the man who knows Kylian Mbappe better than any coach alive, said it himself. If you expect Mbappe to run 11 kilometers a match, that is not happening. That was not Xabi Alonso's quote. That was Deschamps, confirming in plain language the exact thing Alonso would eventually be sacked for trying to demand. But before the sacking came the slow grind. According to reports inside the club, the players felt the training sessions were excessively heavy. They complained about receiving an overwhelming amount of information. Xabi's overzealousness in tactical work, the constant corrections, the endless attention to detail, All of it extended to his assistants, especially his deputy Sebas Pariella. Having so many people giving instructions and monitoring every single detail made the footballers uncomfortable. Read that sentence again, slowly, because that is the most Real Madrid sentence ever written. These are professional athletes earning hundreds of millions of euros a year playing for the most demanding club on earth, and they were uncomfortable because the coaching staff was paying too much attention. Xabi, of course, thought exactly the opposite. From his side, the situation was a nightmare. The Club World Cup had ruined his pre-season. He had been thrown straight into competitive football with no real preparation time. He needed every minute of every session to install the ideas the team was nowhere near executing. He saw a squad full of bad habits, sloppy positioning, and players who had been allowed to coast for years. They saw a manager who would not shut up. Neither side was wrong. They were just on completely different planets, orbiting completely different versions of what Real Madrid was supposed to be. And in that gap, the rot started growing. Long faces, lack of attitude, whispering between drills. Until one morning, Xabi Alonso could not take it anymore. He stopped a session in front of the entire first team and said the sentence out loud. "I didn't know I came here to coach a nursery. It was not a warning. It was not even an outburst. Not really. It was a cry of exhaustion." A man who had finally figured out with full clarity what kind of room he was actually standing in. And the moment he said it, the wound opened, permanently. Here is the detail that should have made Xabi Alonso pack his bags that same week. Around the time of the nursery comment, the name Álvaro Arbeloa started circulating in the first team dressing room. Not as a coach, not as an assistant, as a solution. Either the club was already floating his name to test the waters, or the players themselves had simply taken note of him because he was, conveniently, always around. As Castilla manager, Arbeloa was a regular face at first team training. He drifted in, watched, smiled at the right people, said hello to the stars, and drifted out. He was, in every sense of the word, available. And Real Madrid players, like all players at all big clubs, can smell availability the way sharks smell blood. Now combine this with what was happening on the pitch. Real Madrid was no longer winning convincingly. The results crisis had arrived. The team that had ridden into October on a wave of post-Clasico euphoria was, by late autumn, looking sluggish and disjointed. Here is where you have to be careful with the narrative. Because when things turned sour, the squad did try. There were nights where you could see them pulling together, fighting through the fatigue, attempting to keep Xabi in his job. That is true. But something had already broken. The doubts had spread upward. Players had started talking to people who talked to other people. The upper echelons of the club were no longer fully behind their coach, because their coach was no longer fully behind their stars. Then came the Spanish Super Cup final. Real Madrid lost it. Florentino Perez walked into the dressing room afterward and told the players calmly that they had not lived up to expectations. The next day, he sacked the manager, not the players, the manager. And that is when you understand exactly how Real Madrid actually works. The Super Cup was the official cause. The shout in November was the actual one. Everything in between was just choreography. Xabi Alonso had said out loud what every honest observer of the club had been thinking for years. This dressing room has no leader. These stars are bigger than the coach. The discipline is gone. He said it. And for that, he had to go. To really understand what Xabi Alonso was trying to fix, you have to look at the last manager who actually fixed it, Zinedine Zidane. Zidane's greatest achievement at Real Madrid wasn't a tactical masterstroke. It wasn't a formation. It wasn't even a Champions League trophy, though he won 3 of those in a row. His greatest achievement was that he changed the work habits of Cristiano Ronaldo, the biggest ego in the club's history, the most demanding athlete on the planet, the player who had built his entire identity on playing every single minute of every single game. Zidane convinced him to skip smaller La Liga matches and save his body for the Champions League knockouts. Ronaldo accepted. He played just 29 league games that season, the fewest of his career. And then in the quarter-final, the semi-final, and the final of the Champions League, he scored 10 goals. Real Madrid won the double. Zidane had taken the largest ego in football and aimed it at the team's actual goals. That was his magic. But here is what nobody talks about. Zidane did not do it alone. Zidane had Sergio Ramos, and Ramos was the difference. After the 2018 Champions League final in Kiev, Ronaldo did a post-match interview and hinted he might leave. Ramos cut him off in the dressing room in front of everyone with a sentence that has since become legend inside the club. "That wasn't good what you did. Don't rush it. We'll help you, but you have to help yourself too." Ronaldo apologised. Gareth Bale described the dynamic with one of the most underrated quotes in modern football history. Ramos was the biggest leader. Zidane didn't do much. That is not a criticism of Zidane. That is a description of a system that worked because the players were holding the discipline from the inside. Zidane was the philosopher. Ramos was the enforcer. And between them, the Galacticos behaved themselves long enough to become a dynasty. Now look at the Real Madrid that Xabi Alonso walked into. Sergio Ramos was gone. Luka Modric, the silent leader who had filled some of that vacuum, was on his way out. People close to Florentino Perez admitted it openly. Losing Modric's leadership in the dressing room was just as damaging as losing his legs on the pitch. Modric was not a captain who shouted. He was a captain who simply was. Professionalism, work ethic, calm in chaos, a natural authority that filled rooms without anyone noticing. And without him, there was nobody. No Ramos, no Modric, no internal voice telling the stars to behave. Just a coach trying to do the work of 3 men with a whistle and a tactics board. Xabi Alonso did not fail because he was a bad manager. He failed because he walked into a system that no longer had any internal authority and tried to be that authority himself. At Real Madrid, that has never worked. Not once. The discipline always has to come from inside the dressing room, because the moment it has to come from the touchline, the players will go to the president and ask for a new touchline, which is of course exactly what they did. Every story about the fall of Xabi Alonso eventually has to walk through one specific door, the door labelled Vinicius Jr. In October, during a match Real Madrid was already winning, Xabi Alonso took Vinicius off. The Brazilian erupted on the touchline. The cameras caught all of it, the shouting, the gestures, the thunderous walk down the tunnel. 2 days later, Vinicius posted an official apology on social media. Read it carefully. It mentioned his teammates, his fans, the badge. It did not mention the manager. Club sources later confirmed the omission was not a mistake. It was deliberate. Vinicius's camp, in that moment, felt the silent backing of the club itself. They knew before anyone else which way the wind was blowing, and it was blowing towards Xabi's door. Vinicius, on his day, is one of the best players on the planet. In 2024, he was Champions League Player of the Season. He scored in the final against Borussia Dortmund. He carried Real Madrid through some of the biggest knockout nights of the post-Ronaldo era. The fans love him for genuine reasons. But the player Xabi Alonso inherited was not the 2024 version. He was a player whose form had been collapsing for over a year. 11 assists, only 7 goals, 16th in the Ballon d'Or. A man who had been at the top of the world a season earlier and was now, by his own standards, miles behind it. And the worse the form got, the bigger the tantrums got. Subbed off tantrum. Whistled by the Bernabeu, frustration directed at the referee, the fullback, the air, anything but the obvious answer. Xabi Alonso looked at this and saw, accurately, a player who had been coddled into bad habits by managers who needed his goals more than his discipline. He tried to coach him. He tried to demand defensive work. Vinicius rebelled, quietly, with the help of his camp, his agents, and the silent nodding of senior club officials. That collision between the star system and a meritocratic approach is where Alonso's case becomes simple and painful. He was right about the team, and the club chose to ignore him. Add Mbappe to this picture and the disaster sharpens. Between 41% and 45% of Real Madrid's attacks this season come exclusively down the left side and the left half space. That isn't a coincidence. That is two superstars camping in the same zip code, watching the rest of the field do their running for them. Bellingham's injuries this year are a direct consequence of overuse, because he is covering ground for three players. The midfield workers are running themselves into hospital appointments to keep the spectacle going on the left. Xabi Alonso saw this, he said it, he tried to fix it. Then Mbappe fell ill at the Club World Cup. While he was out, Gonzalo Garcia scored 4 goals and won the Golden Boot of the tournament. The press started using the words "next Raúl." When Mbappe recovered, Florentino Perez expected him to walk straight back into the starting 11. Xabi left him on the bench. The official reason, not yet 100% fit. The actual reason, Garcia had been doing the job. The boring, ugly, useful job. The lesson the players took from that decision was simple. The new manager will bench Mbappe. He has lost his mind. The lesson the president took was different. The new manager will not protect my biggest signing. He has to go. Pep Guardiola, who has watched a few of these things over the years, reportedly told Xabi Alonso something during this period that captures the entire situation in one sentence. He told him he had to do things his own way, but added that at Real Madrid that usually does not fly. It was a warning dressed up as encouragement. And by the time Xabi heard it, it was already too late to act on it, because the squad had figured out the cheat code. If you do not like what the manager is asking, sulk, whisper, wait. The president will eventually arrive with a solution shaped like a new manager. Bellingham felt the heat of this dynamic in real time. In December, when Real Madrid was struggling and his own form had collapsed to 4 league goals, he stood in front of the cameras and delivered a sentence that should have been engraved on the dressing room door. When things are not going well, a lot of problems get invented. We are all behind the manager. There is no debate about that. 2 months later, the manager was gone. There is no debate about that indeed. Endrick was signed for €50 million. Under Xabi, he played about 100 minutes across half a season. Xabi told him directly he would not get minutes while Mbappe played his position. Endrick left on loan to Lyon. The kid did nothing wrong. He was simply standing in a chair already promised to a Galactico. Gonzalo Garcia, the Club World Cup hero, was being prepared for a summer sail before the dust on his golden boot had settled. Not because he was not good enough, because at Real Madrid, there is no permanent room for workers once the stars are healthy, and the stars on their side kept signalling exactly what kind of dressing room this had become. Antonio Rudiger reportedly clashed with a first-team player during the season. According to The Athletic, that player was Alvaro Carreras. All of this was happening while Xabi Alonso was being painted in the press as the problem. The man who had explicitly diagnosed a leaderless dressing room was being told by everyone that the leaderless dressing room was actually his fault. Xabi Alonso was sacked in January. Alvaro Arbeloa was promoted from Castilla. Internal candidate, familiar face, spoke the language of the dressing room, a safe pair of hands. By safe, of course, the club meant compliant. The first sign of how things were going to go came in Arbeloa's earliest press conferences. After a Copa del Rey exit to a second division side, he did not blame the players. After a defeat to Mallorca, he said the loss was absolutely on him. After being dismantled tactically by Bayern Munich in the Champions League, he admitted Madrid lacked tactical sharpness and said Bayern is a team that knows exactly what it is doing. The players were never the problem. They were never even mentioned. Compare this to Xabi, who had spent 6 months telling the media, in carefully chosen but unmistakable words, that the players had to step up. The contrast was the point. That was the entire job description. And the results, with this new philosophy of total absolution, got dramatically worse. Xabi Alonso lost 6 matches in 34. Arbeloa managed to lose 5 in his first 18. Let that one breathe for a second. After the Bayern defeat, Arbeloa stood in front of cameras and admitted Real Madrid was not as tactically sharp as Bayern, a team that knows exactly what it is doing. That is exactly what Xabi Alonso had been trying to implement. The thing the players rebelled against. The thing he was sacked for. And now it was being publicly admitted by the man who had freed them from it as the very thing they were missing. If you ever wanted a moment that captured the entire absurdity of modern Real Madrid, that was it. Then came Mbappe's training ground argument with a member of Álvaro Arbeloa's staff who had called him offside in a drill. Mbappe reacted with insulting language. The behaviour, according to The Athletic, did not go down well inside the club. Staff members and representatives of other players criticised both Mbappe and the club, mainly because they felt the situation should have been handled more seriously. Then Mbappe took a trip to Italy with his partner during a recovery period. The Spanish press lost its mind. Arbeloa, according to sources, distanced himself from the situation publicly while privately telling people he was not happy with how the club had handled it. Welcome, Alvaro. As Xabi Alonso could have told you, you are not a manager at Real Madrid. You are a babysitter. And then came the night that confirmed every word Xabi Alonso had ever said. Champions League, Real Madrid versus Bayern Munich. The kind of match the Bernabeu was built for. Real Madrid lost. But the score was not the story. The story was a single moment captured by every broadcast camera in the building that summed up the entire post-Xabi era in 3 seconds of body language. Bellingham asked for the ball. Bellingham, a vice-captain, a former Bundesliga winner, a man who had been told just weeks earlier by Florentino Perez himself that he needed to become the team's leader, asked for the ball, and he was told to shut up by a teammate on the pitch during a Champions League match. Iker Casillas, who knows a thing or two about how Real Madrid is supposed to behave, addressed it within hours. Bellingham asked for the ball, and you tell him to shut up. I cannot imagine Toni Kroos asking Cristiano Ronaldo for more passes and Ronaldo telling him to shut up. Casillas, like everyone else with eyes, identified the only 2 players on the pitch who looked like they actually wanted to win that match. Bellingham and his fellow midfielder. Just 2 in a Real Madrid first 11. You cannot give the players that much power, he said. It is impossible for a manager to run a dressing room when the club always sides with the players. He was diagnosing, with the calm of a former captain, exactly the same disease Xabi Alonso had screamed about in November. The same diagnosis by a different doctor months too late. 3 weeks after Xabi Alonso was fired, Florentino Perez called Jude Bellingham into his office. He told him he had to become the team's leader. According to multiple sources, 4 other players received similar private calls during the same period. The president was now behind closed doors, telling individual players the exact thing Xabi Alonso had been trying to tell the entire dressing room for 6 months. Privately, quietly, in the safety of his office where it could be denied later. Because saying it in public would mean admitting what Xabi had said all along. This dressing room has no leader. Florentino Perez could not say those words out loud, because saying them would have meant admitting that the manager he had just fired was right, and the players he protected were the problem. So instead, he whispered, to one player, then another, like a man passing notes in a burning building, hoping nobody else would smell the smoke. There is a particular kind of stillness in a Real Madrid press room when the next manager walks in. The cameras click, the microphones lean forward, and whoever just got the job stands there, fresh suit, fresh smile, fresh certainty that he finally will be the one who cracks the code. Every one of them believed it. Capello, Schuster, Pellegrini, Benitez, Lopetegui, Solari. Each arrived convinced they would be the exception. Each left with the same confused expression, holding a press release written in past tense. The dressing room outlived all of them. It will outlive Arbeloa. It will outlive whoever comes after Arbeloa. That is not a tragedy. That is the design. Real Madrid was built to survive its managers, not to be coached by them. The job was never to lead. The job was to absorb the blame, smile at the cameras, and disappear quietly when the players got bored. Xabi just forgot to smile.